Hello everyone, GM. Welcome back to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. It is your Wednesday interview, and joining me today on the podcast is Seedphrase. I think y'all will know him as Seedphrase. His real name is Danny. I was debating saying Danny, but joining me on the podcast today is Seedphrase. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think this was a really good time to have Seedphrase on the podcast. He has been in the markets since 2014, 2013, 15, I don't know, early. So he has been through a number of market cycles, done very well for himself, trading within those market cycles, but also learning about those market cycles. So it was just a great time to talk to him about how he's feeling in this bear market. And I think you're going to really enjoy and value his perspective. We also dive pretty deep into what he is investing in during this cycle, which I think folks will find valuable. I know, honestly, I did. I was pretty skeptical before he came on the podcast about, I don't know, things I'd heard him say in the past. And I felt like he really persuaded me on a couple of points. And then the other thing we get into a lot in this episode is Wolf Game, which is a project that I've certainly known about for a long time and was tracking in its early days, but hadn't dove deep into more recently, though I know people have been swearing by it. And it was really interesting to get his perspective on Wolf Game. Again, there are a couple moments where I maybe push back on a couple of things, but by and large, I think folks will really enjoy this. And if you're a Wolf Game maxi, you're going to love this one. It's hopium in a lot of ways, or whatever you'd call it. So hoping you guys enjoy this one. A couple administrative notes before we kick off. Today is Wednesday, and we are going live for OPJ NFT holders with tickets for our LA event at 12 p.m. Eastern today. So we are having our next OPJ tour event is on May 16th. That is going to be with Kevin Rose and Frank DeGods. I think that'll be a great conversation. It's going to be at the Bright Moments Gallery in Venice in LA. And it'll be a time, we'll have awesome drinks, awesome conversation. We'll hang, we'll mingle. Oh, the time we will have. So if you're an OPJ NFT holder, you can start reserving your seats for that today at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And then if you are a holder of something in the Proof ecosystem or of something in the DGods ecosystem, so that includes Utes, you can start reserving your seat this coming Friday, which is May 5th. I got that wrong in a tweet I sent out. You can start reserving your tickets May 5th at 12 p.m. Eastern time if you are a Proof holder or anything in the Proof ecosystem, or you're in the DGods ecosystem. Whew, okay, I think that does it. I had an amazing time in Austin. So grateful to everyone who came out. It was a really great conversation with Daniel Allegre. We will be posting that probably next week, but we're going to turn around as soon as we can for y'all. So hopefully early next week, we will have that interview live for everybody. And with that, we need to hear a word from our incredible sponsors who make this show possible, and then it will be on to my interview with Seedphrase. Y'all know I think one of the most powerful use cases for NFTs are loyalty programs, which is why I'm so excited about our latest partner, GALXE. That's GALXE. GALXE is a leading platform for building a Web3 community. It is a no-code, plug-and-play solution to create task-based campaigns and loyalty programs. With over 67 million users, GALXE has worked with folks like Optimism, Polygon, Arbitrum, and more than 2,100 other partners with reward-based loyalty programs of their own. And I'm especially excited to announce their latest product offering, GALXE Mintlist. Mintlist enables NFT projects to issue allow lists based on different user profiles. It's free to use, and projects can then take advantage of GALXE's other offerings, like Task and Quest, which incentivize audience growth and user retention in the long term. Go beyond the mint and keep using GALXE's infrastructure to reward users through on and off-chain actions. GALXE's goal is to help projects grow in an authentic way and help them retain their users and communities over the long haul. And as a user, you can start contributing to your favorite Web3 communities today, joining allow lists through Mintlist and earning rewards, NFTs, oats, tokens, and points. Go to galaxy.com right now, that's GALXE.com right now, or click the link in the show notes to get started. Your Web3 community is waiting. I am so excited to announce that this year, Overpriced JPEGs has partnered with OPENSEA, the world's leading NFT marketplace built for everyone, creators, collectors, noobs, and experts alike. I'm an OPENSEA user because they have the best selection of NFTs and a truly inclusive view of the ecosystem, supporting 8 chains and 8 global languages. I trust the systems they've put in place to keep the space safe, like copyright protection, malicious URL detection and removal, robust verification, and more. It's why they are the place to buy, sell, and create NFTs. That's right. You know OPENSEA, you use OPENSEA, but did you know that OPENSEA now has drops? New exclusive projects launch every week from top projects and creators, and you can check them out now using the link in the show notes. They also recently introduced self-serve drops, which is in beta, and allows creators to launch their projects right on OPENSEA. This drops product gives creators access to tools like rich storytelling drop pages, multi-chain support, and drop mechanic customization. The full launch for self-serve drops is coming this spring. So check out the upcoming drops on OpenSea right now using the link in the show notes and own what moves you. You'll also be supporting the show in the process. Hello, everyone. GM. Welcome back to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. We got a live conversation, which I always say, but that's not actually true. We have a special conversation for you today because it is an in-person, not live conversation. Joining me in a studio from Austin, Texas, we are both here for Consensus, is Seedphrase.
Seedphrase Danny, GM, everyone. Thanks for having me, Carly. We're excited.
Thanks so much for being here. In from London, I believe. Is that right?
I am in London. Yes, correct.
Love it. You were telling me you're trying some Southern food, getting a taste for the local fare here in Austin, Texas.
It's a lot, I have to say. I actually had like a bit of a crook belly the other night.
Yep, yes.
And I got warned afterwards that you're not meant to be drinking the local tap water here.
Oh.
So I think that's what it might have been. I'm not too sure.
Oh, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. You're getting the true experience. I thought you were going to say it's from all like the rich food, which would also give somebody a crook stomach.
Also the rich, salty, fatty food as well. Definitely that helps.
You're getting the true experience.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to have you on today. We have a lot to talk about. I'm interested in what you're doing with the Seedphrase character and how you're building this brand around your punk. So I think we'll close with some conversations around that. But I also think it's cool to have you on. We're recording this on April 26th, I guess it is.
Yes.
And I mean, really, the market has just about never felt bleaker. And by every quantitative measure, in many ways, like really hasn't been bleaker since, November 2020 or whatever, 21, whatever it is. I mean, active users all-time low or, hitting new lows, volume hitting new lows, prices just absolutely plummeting and feels like it could go lower. VCs, less money from VCs, money than ever before. How are you feeling? And I want to get into like, is there a world where we're like hitting a bottom? I don't know. I want to talk about that. So how are you feeling first off?
Yeah, I think what we're witnessing right now is peak capitulation. We are seeing, very much signs of people selling at big losses, for whatever reason, whether that is for like taxes or they've got like mortgage repayments. The economy obviously isn't in a good state right now either. And there is blood on the streets, right? And like I think, I've been in this space now, in crypto for over 10 years. And, I have, lived through the booms and the busts of the market cycles. And I think everything is just cyclical and NFTs aren't immune to that, right? So, even during peak mania, peak euphoria, when everyone was buying the lions and the penguins and, the cats and everything else, it was like, I was trying to tell people like, this isn't going to last forever, right? Like, we do need to see some kind of pullback. This can't, where is all this money coming from? And, and I think, we are now starting to see the doldrums of that. I've always been one to invest with that mindset that, Warren Buffett sort of like, outlines, which is like, you be greedy when others are fearful, be fearful when others are greedy. And that's what I've always lived, by myself. So, I think like right now, like, during like this peak capitulation, it's like a perfect time to actually be buying. And that's what I have been doing. I'm out there with my mop and I'm mopping up that blood. And, I'm very much, doing this because I do believe that, we will see another market cycle high. We will see that euphoria come back, back to the markets again. But it's just like, this was definitely needed because I think, at the time as well, the market was getting quite frothy, quite toxic, and I think it was like a good moment to basically just like sort of like wash all of that away and like really see who is staying around for the actual tech and for the actual community and for the culture and not just because of the profits.
Yeah. I was going to get to trading in a little bit, but I think you're teeing us up well for it. So maybe we jump the gun a little here. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, do you feel like it was interesting when Franklin left and then Maki left, which I'm skeptical as to how long that will or will not last. But that was a moment for me. I was like, this feels like a bottoming moment. Like it's that almost, like maybe there's a month left of this or something. But it for me, I was like, once two very public figures have quote unquote left the space, anybody who is going to leave, it feels like it's going to be within the next like 2 weeks. And that's when you can start to hit that bottom, because once you're left with just everybody else who isn't going to leave, there's really nowhere to go but up.
Well, exactly, right? It's like kind of like when, once you get to that bottom, it's kind of like you just need to like weigh it up, like, the risk reward. Like, what's the likelihood of this dropping another 90% to this going up, another 1,000%? And I really do believe like we are much closer to the bottom than like where we are going to be to the top in the next like 12 to 18 months. And I think you're completely right. Like, when we are seeing these like, big name influencers, some of them, with like quite, questionable past as well. And also like leveraging, through lending as well, which is obviously like, very risky itself. When they are like bombing out of this space alongside many other influencers in the last like 12 months, I really do believe like we are getting to that point where there is a lot of blood on the streets and, a lot of projects are down, 80, 90%. You really have to ask yourself, like, how much further like down can this go?
Mm-hmm. The lending thing is an interesting point too. That also, as I build this case to make myself sleep better around like why we're hitting bottom, part of that story is the lending markets where you see like a pretty high amount of loans that are sort of at risk relative to in the past, which typically has themselves been like local bottom moments where these folks who borrowed against their apes or punks or whatever it is, like are forced to either, yield them or buy them back. And usually they buy them back. So usually like, that could be a bottom. Did you post FTX go like, oh, this is the bottom and then it went lower? Or like, are you really now feeling like we're really close now to actually hitting a bottom of some sort?
It's funny when you said that because like I always think of that meme where it's like it's in the church like with the gun and it's like the dip, it's like the dippity dip, the dippity dip dip.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like that a little bit because like last year was such a train wreck, right? Like we had Celsius, we had FTX, we had all these big moments where you couldn't think of it like getting any worse than this, and that also is like something that actually gives me confidence that we are closer to the bottom as well because I feel like FTX and Celsius and, 3ARK and things like that, like they get all kind of like sped up the inevitable, right? Like these market cycles are going to play out no matter what, right? So it was kind of like instead of maybe like this like bear market lasting, a few years, maybe we've just sped that up a little bit. So like that's kind of like what I'm sort of like playing at right now. Like I'm very much there buying up what I can, perceive to be like, high value, what's going to maybe like, go up well in the next bull market. And I really do believe like we are much closer to the bottom than, what most people will actually probably realize because I guess like, when the market is fearful, when everyone is, yelling and screaming and crying about their bags, that is usually a good time to be buying. And I just feel like, it's like market psychology, right? It's like you need to be doing like the opposite of what the crowd wants. It's just the complete, exactly like during the bull market when everyone was euphoric and everyone's yelling buy, 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 buy. That's usually a pretty good time to be selling.
Yeah. I am going to ask folks, Seedphrase the obvious question, which is what is he buying? But I'm going to drag this out so y'all stay with me. So have you been buying, when did you kind of start buying? Have you been buying for the past 6 months and just kind of slowly essentially like DCAing, though that wouldn't really apply, but into JPEGs for the last 6 months? Or when did you really start the buying back process?
Yeah, look, like, during the peak euphoria, it got to a point where like people were coming to me and being like, Seedphrase, like, what are you investing in? And I didn't have an answer for them because like everything had already gone up so much. I felt bad to like, give them any kind of investment. Not that I give investment advice, but like, to tell them like what I'm, watching at the current time. So like for me at least, like, I really have been focusing on yield generating assets, right? So like, very much like GameFi, if I have a PFP of some sort, I don't want that PFP just purely for the flex. I want to be able to like yield something from that PFP as well, and I've been able to like carve out like a pretty sizable, GameFi portfolio, which is yielding me, every week, some funds, and I'm then able to then use that money to then like, buy into like, other projects as well. So my big focus is like, GameFi, and then like also just like the big like hitters of the bear market. Jack Butcher is definitely like one of those. Like I think like he's done a fantastic job considering the market conditions to be able to like, get that saturation, to get that engagement, to get that awareness around like what he is doing. And I think like, if this was a bull market, like, the value of like most of his projects would have probably been like a 10x. It's just like we are in the doldrums right now. And I just feel like, those are the sort of like, the gems that I'm sort of like looking out for. It's like, if this had launched during a bull market, how would have this actually, performed?
Well, you jumped the gun there. You did give me some specifics, which I'm going to push even further on specifics and ask within GameFi. And then I want to talk about the Jack Butcher thing. But has this been like, have you been investing since, like you kind of didn't know how to invest in the bull market, which I think is smart. And how much of that do you think is having been through so many cycles now? Because you got into Bitcoin in 2015, 13? Yeah, I mean, really early. Because everybody knows the Buffett phrase, what's hard is actually doing it when you're fighting your own, to your point, psychology around like being greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. Do you think that's like a practice thing for you? Were you always good at that dynamic?
It was definitely like, it came with practice. Like I got into Bitcoin at the start of 2013. I experienced my first market cycle by the end of 2013. So, I think Bitcoin peaked around $1,200. And then we had a couple of years of just bear market where like nothing was going up, everything was going down. But we did have like these like micro trends, throughout the bear market where it was like kind of like country coins or color coins or privacy coins, right? And like that's kind of like what we're seeing right now, like with like memes. So like I feel like I have, been there and I've done that. And like with that sort of like knowledge, that time in the market, I've been able to sort of like, with like some accuracy, be able to like, predict, when is this topping out and like, when should this be bottoming out as well. So like, during the bull market, like I absolutely was like, cashing out like on a lot of my positions. And I absolutely, also missed on a few positions as well.
You had like a $25 million offer on one of your apes or something.
So I like, during the bull market, like, and it was hilarious. Like, Farouk will, tell everyone this story as well. Like, I was in LA living in this house with Farouk and I got this message that, I had a buyer for my full set of autoglyphs for $25 million.
Oh, it wasn't an ape. It was your autoglyph.
Yes. And like, it was like within like minutes, I just said no. Like, I don't want to sell them. And like, Farouk just looked at me. He's like, are you crazy? And I was like, no, like, for me, like they are so historical. They're so rooted in fundamentals. Whereas like, I would rather hold these and like put these in a museum one day and then like sell them for $25 million, because at the time, $25 million was like nothing when everything was exploding like 100x in dollar values, right? So, I also got caught up, somewhat in the hype as well. But like, I did like take out enough at least to still live like comfortably. And, I think like, it's always good to have a little bit of dry powder, right? Like, in case the market does turn, you want to have some dry powder, be able to like pick up some bargains. And I have been doing that since like the last like 9 months, I would say. I've been sort of like starting to like, there's certain projects that have been like catching my eye and like certain things that I've been like, okay, like this is at a level where like I'm happy to accept that risk now.
Yeah. Okay. 25 million for your whole collection. I thought it was on like a couple of assets. I understand a little bit more. You're like, I don't want to part with the whole thing.
Whole 10.
But you said the fundamentals thing, and I at some point I want to push back on this. Actually, let's do it now. We're just diving into the trading stuff, so why not? Because again, on this conversation you did with Rect Radio, you were talking about fundamentals and how you assess your investing, and you're like the fundamentals of autoglyphs are so strong. I think that's kind of bullshit. Like I think fundamentals, if you're Warren Buffett and you're looking at profit and loss statements and the moat of the business. And I think there is such a thing as fundamentals when you're trading actual businesses and you own a piece of that business. I think when people talk about fundamentals in NFTs, it's kind of bullshit. Why am I wrong?
Okay, well, to begin with, you're wrong.
Okay, tell me why.
Well, I think we have seen time and time again people place a disproportionate amount of value on NFTs with historical fundamentals, right? So what we saw in the last, euphoric bull run was like people were like digging through the Ethereum blockchain to see if there was any like unknown, mysterious, NFT projects that had just been like soft launched that we didn't even know about, right? Like Mooncats were an example of that, right? Like people just discovered this like contract called Mooncats, and they predated, most of the NFT projects. I think they didn't quite predate Punks, but they're like maybe like second. And the fact that like people got so hyped around that, it's like it just shows that like people really like, just like Bitcoin as well. Like Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency to like give people full control over like their finances and everything like that. And I feel like people take that same sort of like mindset to NFTs as well, right? So it's kind of like with autoglyphs, like there's there's been like, since then, like such a big, what should we say? Like, like generative art has like really like taken shape, right? Like, a lot of people have embraced it. And, when you look at generative art, when you look at art blocks, you have to like look at like the granddaddy, like where did that all begin? And like that was autoglyph. So it was the first on-chain generative art. And like it may not look nice, but the fact that it was first like holds a lot of value to a lot of people.
So my pushback would be Curio Cards, very early project. Had a little bit of a pump, predates CryptoPunks, right? Had a little bit of a pump in the bull thing. I don't think they're doing anything now. I think you can pick them up really cheap. Mooncats is also, I think, down pretty bad at this point now. Like, it's kind of dead. Avastars is one that I've talked about recently on the show, so now it's always to mind. Like, first all on-chain art, really foresaw the PFP movement. Obviously, you had punks first, but like, doesn't seem to do anything. It feels like, sure, you can say, it feels like you can apply like, a fundamental label to a project that's successful to justify why it's been successful, but then you can find 6 exceptions to that rule. So how is it really a fundamental?
I think it's like, what you're looking for is like, was it the first to start a movement, right? Like punks were the first PFP 10K project that started the whole culture of Web3, right? Like, Curio Cards, no one had heard of them until recently. Whereas like punks were very much like distilled and rooted, in this like Web3 culture from the very beginning. And, I think, like what I mentioned, like, with autoglyphs as well, is like the same thing. It's like, we've seen, generative art blossom. Like it's taken off. It's, it's one of my favorite, areas as well to like, be investing in and to be watching. And it's kind of like, this all started with autoglyphs. Like this wouldn't have been possible without autoglyphs, like paving that way. So it's like they're historically, significant, but they're also incredibly relevant as well. They're something that's actually like started a movement. And I think like that's the power of punks and glyphs over all of these other exceptions is like they were nobodies. Like no one knew about them until very recently. They didn't have any sway on the culture or on the community or how this entire space was shaped. So I think like for me, it's like that's what I'm really like focused on. I'm like focused on like who are the first movers, who are the heavy hitters, who are the people, all the the projects that actually like put down the fundamentals, the foundation of what we enjoy today.
So you wouldn't buy Mooncats right now, even though they were early?
I just because Mooncats were early alone doesn't make me want to buy them because
you gave the example. I'm only throwing them back.
Absolutely. But because they weren't culturally relevant, right? Like no one really cared about Mooncats until they just discovered them only a couple of years ago. Whereas like punks have really like traversed that whole like that cultural relevancy now as well, right? Like you show someone a punk, you mention a punk to someone, and they'll be like, oh, like I know that, and they completely understand at that moment what that represents. You mention a mooncat to someone, they would have no idea what it is, So I think that's the big difference. It's not just because it's like historically fundamentals, but it's also like that relevance and like what its impact that it had on culture.
Okay, so their fundamentals to you is one, historical relevance, launched a movement, of which there's a pretty small handful of projects that fit that category. I mean, autoglyphs, punks. I mean, would you put Apes in that category?
I would put Apes in that category just because, like, I do perceive them as, like, one of the first projects that did get that mainstream acceptance and mainstream adoptance. Like, I think, what we saw with, like, celebrities, we're seeing Apes on, like, cans of water, like, at, like, burger stores. I think they did definitely, like, etch into that. And I felt like that kind of like was what helped punks sort of like, get into that as well. Whereas like, we're talking about two very different projects as well. And like, that's what I love about it, right? So like, you have Apes that are more kind of like your supreme. They are very culturally relevant. Whereas like, I think like punks are also culturally relevant, but like they are more historically relevant, right? Like they kind of started that. Like without punks, there's no Apes. They were the original 10K PFP project.
Well, and the important distinction here, and like for me, I would feel more comfortable at this point buying a punk than an ape, because what I think Larva was very smart about, though they got shit for it for a little period of time, was not like, we're not going to do shit. This is a store of value. It's a historical piece of art. Like they, by not doing anything else, not in terms of releasing new things, but not doing anything in terms of trying to like build community XYZ, they allowed that to live as a store of value thing in the way that I think autoglyphs is, in a way that Apes is not. So my concern with an Apes would be if they mess this up, like if the metaverse vision doesn't come into pass, if the gaming vision doesn't come to pass. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. And like that's why I've never really held an ape before. I've had one and then that was
Wait,
it.
Really?
I've only ever had one.
Sold like a hoodie. Oh no, a hoodie punk.
Hoodie punk, yes, exactly.
Of course,
so, like,
and no hoodie ape.
I did find an ape that had 7 traits. It did have the top hat. It did have a cigarette, and I was like, fantastic, I'll buy it.
Yeah, the top hat thing. Yeah.
I got the top hat thing going, right? But like I ended up flipping that for a 50 ETH profit. I think I sold it for about 150 ETH, which is pretty much the top. The top, yeah, exactly.
Well timed.
Exactly. But no, I agree with you. Like I think the value in punks is that they don't have to do anything at all, and I don't expect them to do anything.
Right.
Like for me, I look at punks as like art, right? Like I want to see punks in like museums, at exhibitions, right? Like I don't want to see a punk on like a burger wrapper or like on a can of water, right? So I think like that's what punks got really well. Whereas in comparison, apes, they kind of pumped because of all the value add that Yuga was giving the holders, right? Like, with the dogs, with the mutant, with the land, with the ape coin. But it was like my big worry was like when all of that stops, what happens to them, right? Like once all the value add stops, and that can only last for a certain amount of time, especially right now, like as we're talking about, like, capitulation, there's no new money coming into this ecosystem, whereas like Yuga Lab is...
The Pepe millionaires, they're going to save us, man.
They're going to save us. That will get us out of the doldrums of the bear market. You know what I mean? So, but we're at a time where like Yuga Labs is, expanding their, like, the
universe.
The universe, exactly. Like, right? Like they've got the apes, they've got the mutants, they've got the coders, like they've got a bunch of new things coming out. And it's kind of like, how do you maintain, those flaws on all of your projects when you're rapidly expanding, when there's really like not much, there's there's not really much like coming into the space right now.
Other than punks and autoglyphs then, and I'm assuming you'd probably put some art blocks in this category, what would you consider the grail, no-brainer investments, let's call it, not financial advice, like along that historical relevance first of its movement category?
Yeah, so like, obviously punks, autoglyphs, you can't look past squiggles. I think like, what Eric did with art blocks was phenomenal. He really put generative art on the map for like a lot of people. Like, admittedly, like I didn't even really understand like what he was doing at the time. So like, I've known Eric before art blocks, and I remember him like telling me about like, this like platform that he was like launching, and like generative art's gonna be like the next big thing. And like I was like, okay, man, like I don't really understand like what you're doing, and like mistakenly like I didn't buy that many squiggles at the time. I do have a perfect spectrum. Like I'm very happy about that.
Oh yeah.
But I at the time I spent on it, right? Like it cost me about 20 ETH. I think the last perfect spectrum sold for like 1,000 ETH now. So like they've gone up like a lot, right? Yeah, it's crazy. So like you definitely can't look past like what Eric has done for this entire space. So I think very much Squiggles is up there. You do have other art blocks such as Fidenzas and Ringers. Have definitely like proven themselves. Not only with their floor prices, but like with the artists themselves, and obviously the tech behind the actual pieces. I think it's like phenomenal. It's very, if you see Fidenza, it's very distinguishable, right? And I love that. So, I think that there's a bunch of art blocks there that, people should be paying attention to. Like obviously one of one art, right? Like, we've got Xcopy, we've got Hackatow, we've got like, a bunch of, very talented, like one of one artists on Super Rare as well that, people should be paying attention to. A lot of their art has actually withstood this bear market, thankfully. And like, people aren't willing to, sell their X copies for cheap, or even like Beeple's, right? Like Beeple's floor is still very high up there, and I think like as I mentioned earlier, like some of the newcomers, like I think what Jack Butcher has released with checks, I think's phenomenal. I think just recently, like last week, we saw all of these like celebrities come out, they were just so outraged that they had lost their check mark, right? Mm-hmm. It just shows the value of what society puts on a check, and I think we live in this day and age now where Twitter is now, pay to play. Like if you want a check mark, you just pay for it. If you want to go on, be verified on Instagram as well, you can get the check mark as well as long as you pay the price. So I think like we're now getting to this world where it is no longer, being verified, through these these overlords, at Meta or at Twitter who determines who's famous and who's not. It's like, people are just paying to have check marks. And I think Jack Butcher beautifully tapped into that as well. So are
you accumulating checks now still, or have you accumulated and you're like?
I'm accumulating still.
Okay.
So I
trying to get that black check.
I'm trying to get the black check, which is pretty much
impossible.
It's unattainable. It's incredibly hard to get. I think you need 64 singular checks to get that. And I think a singular check sells for 100 each. So it's pretty up there. I would love one. I think it'd be very on brand for Seedphrase to have a black check. It's very much on my radar. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm just trying to load up on floor checks, and then I can composite them later on when I need them, right? I just think I'm just sort of being very watchful of the floor. I'm wondering whether it goes down a little bit more, which means I can obviously buy some more checks, or whether this is the bottom, what we're talking about. No one really knows truly where the bottom or the top is, but it's just about DCA, like you mentioned. I think checks is definitely going to be a big one. And I've been buying into a lot of GameFi assets as well. I think why would you ever play a video game purely for entertainment when you can be entertained but also earn money at the same time?
I'll tell you why.
Why?
Because there's all sorts of studies that once you start getting paid for something, even if you found the thing fun originally, your psychology about it changes such that it suddenly feels like the stakes are higher. It feels like work.
I was about to say, does it start feeling like work? Yes.
Now, look, I am bullish on GameFi too, so I don't say that to disagree that this will be a factor, but that specific question, I actually feel like there is a whole cohort of people and there will still be free gaming or, gaming where you're not earning, because I do think actually psychologically it changes it.
And I think the thing is that's through delegation as well, right? So even though I'm invested in GameFi, I'm not going to be the one day to day in these virtual worlds and playing the game myself. And I'm going to be delegating that to players who don't have the financial means to buy these game assets necessarily, but it's we can just take a revenue split on that, and then they do the work, and then I get a cut from them.
It's Axie Guilds.
It's Axie Guilds all over again, right? But it's going to be next level, right?
But that didn't work so well.
It didn't work so well, and that's why I love Wolf Game, because I think they've been watching and learning, throughout the last few years, and Axie Infinity made the mistake of highly inflating their economy too quickly. It basically went vertical, and obviously what goes up must come down, right? Whereas Wolf Game, they've proven time and time again through mini games that they understand more sustainable models, right? They had this cave game that didn't create any inflation within the game world, but it was highly addictive, incredibly fun, and it was able to yield people a lot of money as well, if you played it well.
Was it actually fun? I know you just said it was, but I'm gonna push.
No. It was actually I didn't play it personally, but the feedback that I received from the community, they're begging for it to come back. So the full game of Wolf Game has already launched, but the thing is, it's Cave Game, it got put away, before the full game, launched, and people are asking for it back. They're we want Cave Game back because it was so much fun. So I would somewhat disagree with what you said earlier about once it does become a job and work, it becomes less fun. I do agree with that, but I also feel if you have to toss up between working at McDonald's or just sitting in bed on your laptop, playing a highly addictive, highly engaging game, maybe like Cave Game, I still feel you're going to have a much better time of doing that than flipping burgers.
Let me introduce you to a brand new company that I could not be more excited about, Web3 Sense. A Web3 analytics platform that combines on-chain data with social media insights to give you the deepest, most meaningful intelligence into any NFT community. I have tested other analytics platforms out there, but Web3 Sense has the most comprehensive capabilities I've seen in the NFT ecosystem. They apply sophisticated data science to wallet histories to determine behavioral patterns and help shape predictive analytics. In other words, they can tell you which Twitter accounts are actually the influencers in your space. And they can tell you what resonates most within a community by looking at what other communities communities token holders are involved in. The number of use cases here is virtually unlimited. So whether you're a trader, creator, institution, brand, agency, I promise Web3 Sense has data that you want to see with the deep and actionable insights that you need to build, analyze, grow, start, whatever you want to do within the NFT space and in terms of building a business and a community. Now, they are still in very early days, so they're eager to connect with the community. So if you're interested in learning more about what Web3 Sense can do for you and your business, and you should be, go and fill out the very short form linked to in the show notes, and someone from their team will reach out with more information and an opportunity for a product demo. Trust me, you won't regret it. And so I've loosely, obviously I was kind of deep following Wolf Game when it first came out, and then I haven't like stayed super up to date on it. So their full game is launched. Is the full game fun? And you know, the problem, and you obviously understand, like the problem with Axie was multifold, right? But it's, you have people playing it just to extract. You don't have anybody who's putting value in. So what is the model in Wolf Game for like value coming in to allow for value to come out?
Exactly. So basically like what they are yet to launch. So the full game has launched, which is just all about resource gathering, right? So like you can breed and you can gather resources, and that's about it. What they're about to do is like they're about to complete that economic loop by launching peak games. And that's going to be kind of like cave game, but there'll be like numerous ones, right? Like you can just check into like whatever game that you want to play, and then you play against other players, and then you can earn their, you know, native currency wool, you know, whether you're successful or not. And then your success in that game is like determined by, you know, certain items that you like create from the resources in the actual game world. So they've created this like really like genius like economic loop where it's kind of like everyone plays their role within the economy, and there's no inflation. For example, I'll give you one where it's like, you know, there's breeding of sheep and there's breeding of wolves, right? But the thing is with Axie was like when you bred your Axies, it just inflated. I think there's like almost 1 million Axies now. Whereas like the thing is, and within Wolf Game is like you need chops to breed your wolves, right? The only way to get chops is by burning your sheep. So some players are just breeding sheep to chop them to then sell to players who are breeding their wolves. And then you need wolf pelts to be able to upgrade, you know, your bathhouses and your barns to higher levels. So that's how they kind of like put like a ceiling on like the inflationary, you know, aspect of like breeding, for example, within this game world.
But don't you still need money coming in?
Absolutely. But the thing is, like, you know, for example, like I've heavily invested in the energy sector, for example. So that's all I'm now focusing on is like, you know, on energy.
Like in the real world or in Wolf Game?
In Wolf Game.
Okay.
Wolf Game. Yeah. So like, I'm very like, so basically like, you know, everything requires energy within the game. Breeding, collecting, peak games, right? And I identified that very early, and I was like, well, this is all I want to focus on now. Like I want to focus on the energy. But in order for me to like, you know, get ahead with energy, that required significant investment from me, right? And then I'll see a return on that like over time.
And what was that investment? Of you like buying it up, you're saying?
Yeah, so like I think I've invested about like 1.5 million so far into Wolf Game. Yeah, so that's money going into the game.
And that's money, and it's going in, is it in the form of you buying assets?
Exactly.
So it's going to other players.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
yes.
so it's not like going to the Wolf Game team per se.
It's to the players.
Okay.
So for example,
because that's not going, you know.
No, then that's what I love about it.
Yeah.
It's like this like circular loop within the economy for the players though, right? So it's kind of like, you know, if you want to, for example, build a bathhouse that requires resources, the only way to get resources is by buying those resources from another player who's collecting those resources, such as wood, stone, water, or grass. And then if you want to upgrade that building, it becomes more efficient, but the upgrade's even more costly, you know, and so on. So the thing is, like, everyone plays a role within the economy. You know, you have people collecting resources to be able to, like, sell those resources to other players who want to, like, upgrade buildings or to be able to purchase, you know, these, like, certain items that are going to be needed in the peak game. You know, you've got people who are breeding either to breed for more collectors such as sheep or for them to like breed more sheep to get some chops to then sell to wolf breeders. So that's what I said. Like, it's kind of like, it's this very like beautiful
delicate,
loop.
elegant ecosystem.
Exactly. And it's all like interconnected somehow.
Okay, so that's very interesting. I do think that games like Wolf Game and in the GameFi world, there are really interesting opportunities to make money because it's the kind of thing where you can go in and understand it well enough to actually have an edge over other people in a way that isn't necessarily really possible in a lot of other areas of NFTs. So I get that, and I think that's very interesting.
To give you something juicy, so I launched Swap Shop at the start of this year, which is purely focused on the energy market in Wolf Game. despite us being in a bear market right now, like that's earning me over $25,000 a month.
Crazy.
So, and that's just from Wolf Game, right? You know, like obviously smaller players with a smaller investment, like that would obviously scale. So like if you put in $100 and you can't expect to be making $25,000 a month from it. But the thing is, it's like, even though we are in the bear market, even though we're like in peak capitulation, the fact that you can still make money in a game like this, that, you know, begs to ask, you know, like what happens during a bull market?
Yeah. So that 25,000 is off of like a 1.5 million investment or less than that. 1.5 is what you put in total.
So 1.5 was the total investment. So like I'm the largest landholder. I have the most sheep. I've purchased wolves, you know, and I also have like significant resources as well, right? So it's very hard to actually work out what I actually put into the bathhouse business, because like I put like significant money just in buying like just random land plots, because they also yield resources as well. But like I would predict that, like, you know, I keep everything in wool for now. So, you know, that's like 25K a month, but in wool at 1 cent.
This is my other question. It's like, so you don't cash that out?
No, exactly. I keep that in wool because...
Why don't you cash that? Wouldn't it be like, just cash a little out, you know?
I could. Like, that's probably like what a more intelligent person would do during a bear market, especially. But the thing is, like, for me, it's like, you know, wool is now 1 cent. I think the top was like 30 to 50 cents, right? I just know, like, anything that is going to survive until the next bull market, which I'm very confident Wolf Game will survive, even if it doubles or triples from here, like, that's like significant, you know, returns. And like, it really brings down like my, you know, my ROI window down a lot. Like right now, I think we're like looking at maybe like 3 years, but like if wool suddenly is worth 2 cents or 3 cents, that comes down to like, you know, 12 months or so, right? And like, I'm very much investing with the expectation that wool is going to be worth, again, not financial advice, but, you know, worth around maybe like 5 to 10 cents within the next 12 months, I would hope, at least anyway.
Okay, so that's interesting. Like I said, I think you're smart to be identifying, obviously, the opportunity there. Cool, you've got this elegant ecosystem. The thing that I also hear, though, is that we've got this delicate dance happening. It sounds like the kind of thing that could also very much have a death spiral. Like, you know, like you knock one of the legs off of that dynamic and the whole fucking thing implodes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, cool. I guess we're on the same page.
But that's what makes it so exciting, right?
Okay. But so do you see this lasting? Is this the kind of thing that's going to last? Like Farmville, right? I mean, I think they've shut down, but that was something that for, you know, had its heyday, but still for, you know, 10 years, 15 years, you had moms who were building that garden, you know, every day.
I knew some of those moms, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like friends' moms, like on their iPads after school.
Is Wolf Game to you? How much of this is a timing thing to you, and you have clearly shown a good history of being able to time things, and how much of this is like, oh, I think this is a long-term play, and for 15 years, people are going to want to play Wolf Game? Yeah,
like for me, like, you know, you can never predict, you know, the next like 10 to 15 years, right? But like for me, I'm always predicting until the next bull market, because like, you know, as I mentioned, like these markets are cyclical, and like that's how I operate as well, like a 4-year cycle. And for me, it's like, you know, if I'm confident that the devs are going to be hanging around, you know, if they are big brains, which they are, then they're anonymous.
Yeah, how do they make money? Or is it Beanie?
It's probably Beanie. But no, they make money from, like, they initially sold the NFTs. So they sold the sheep, they sold the wolves, they sold the land,
so
they sold the farmers.
Are they still just like operating on primary sales?
I think they made a ton from that. Like, I don't know exactly.
And there were still royalties in the early when they actually launched.
6.9%. What a meme. You know, they also earn 6.9% royalties as well on everything. And like,
do they still though, or are these assets
think they
being
do.
traded elsewhere?
I think they moved them now to like a gated, you know, OpenSea contract.
Okay, so
I'm pretty sure they're making like a lot from royalties as well. Like, and that's in like the tens of millions of dollars. And I think like the team's like relatively small.
Yeah.
You know, so it is, you know, small. It probably doesn't cost them too much to operate. And the great thing about them is like it's a small team. They've raised a ton of money, but they've just been delivering. Like they've delivered probably more than like most, you know, GameFi projects to date. Like even Axie Infinity, you know, I was there from the beginning, 2018 or something. You know, they've been building for like what is that now, 5 years, and they've only just started to like really like come out, with like Homeland, the new and improved battle system and everything like that. Whereas like, and that's only just recently, like you've only been able to like make some money from that. Whereas like Wolf Game, like almost from the beginning, you've been able to like make money within this, in-game economy that's this like sustainable, interlooping, world. Like I think like that is like what's like most attractive to me.
Do you think it's too late to get into Wolf Game now and see good returns?
Absolutely not, because as we've seen across the across the spectrum, every single NFT is down right now, and Wolf Game hasn't been immune to that. Like people are buying, for example, like there's different like alpha levels. You've got 8. 7, 6, and 5. And, some of these wolves were selling for like tens of ETH, like not very long ago. And like now they're like, in single digits. So, and also land, I was buying land at 0.3 Ethereum and like, some of this land's now 0.08, right? So like, if you really like just believe that it's more just the market cycle and not the actual game speaking for itself, I think it's a decent time to be, getting some sort of exposure to it at least anyway. Because I do really believe like, Wolf Game and Creeps and, a handful of other like GameFi projects, they are really going to be like leading the charge in the next bull market. As we saw, DeFi really to like take off before the last bull run. I think we're going to see like GameFi summer as well. I think we are going to see like a big emphasis on like, gaming in particular.
My feeling with the Wolf Game, which is tied to what I was saying earlier about why I think these are interesting opportunities, is yes, you can go in and somebody could come right now and buy a wolf or buy some wool, probably is the cheapest entry point or whatever the case may be, right? But it's really the advantage if you actually start to understand the game at a deep level. Like that's where you can actually find opportunity. Again, in a way that in some ways you used to be able to do tracking rares in NFTs, but that's sort of gone away. You can really still do that, I feel like, in a couple of
and that's
areas.
Where that's how Swap Shop came about, right? Because like I really like got to understand the mechanics of Wolf Game. And, I realized that there was like this like big opportunity cost that like people were leaving on the table, having to take 30 to 40 days to recharge their sheep before they could use their sheep again, right? So like seeing like those sort of like opportunities, like they are everywhere in this space. It's just a matter of like looking for them.
Okay, and let's go back to this fundamentals thing real quick, and then we might circle back to creeps. We're going to wind everywhere. So, okay, we have this sense that you've got these fundamentals in the form of historical projects. I buy that if you could call, there's a certain amount of fundamentals in understanding yielding, right? Like, yeah, you can call that a fundamental, right? Yeah. Like if you understand what you're yielding, now, again, the risk there is like getting out in time, I think, right? That's certainly a lesson a lot of people learned in this past bull run was like,
Absolutely.
Great, it's awesome to have a sick APY until the firm implodes.
Until the floor falls out beneath you, right?
Yeah, or until Celsius goes bankrupt, you know, and then that API wasn't so worth it. So I think that's good. Always the caution there. I think where I get particularly skeptical, perhaps, is... I heard you on this past podcast talking about the other things you look at are community and team, which I think sounds really good. And certainly those are not like non-factors when you're looking at investing in something. But it's not, again, the team, if you're investing in a business, makes a ton of sense, right? But you could have a really smart team who builds an amazing company and you don't actually have equity in that thing. And the token goes to zero and the community moves on to another project. Like how much weight or stake do you really put in a team or a community when you're evaluating where to put money?
Well, I think you need to like look at the product first, right? Like, does the product, have a market fit within this space? Like, is it going to be like, does it look like it could be successful? And like, what is the engagement like around that? Like when you are seeing, a project tweet and you've got like there's like hundreds of like hungry followers eating everything up that they're tweeting about, when you have this like, like for example, like with like Wolf Game, like, I mentioned like they do have this scorecard of delivering, they have done this time and time again within a 1 year period. And like, I think like, if you are like, investing with that in mind, like, I think you can't go wrong. It's more like when you're actually investing in something that you don't fully understand, when, the team doesn't have any kind of like, past experience of like doing this. They haven't, even delivered anything yet. It's kind of like all like this like hopium of like belief that this grand product will eventually be shipped. That's a little bit more like scary to me. Like I'm not going to be like throwing down millions on a project like that because it still has a lot to prove, right? And like I just think like, especially in Web3, like community matters. Community is number one. And I think like when you have these projects that have this like loyal, large, following that will just like defend you to the very end. It's not like this like community that's just popped up over like, over a weekend because it's like the next big trend, in the market, like Pepe or something like that. It's like an actual like loyal following that has been there from day one. And they believe in the vision of the project. They believe in the team. And, I think like, you mentioned like there is no equity in these projects. That's absolutely correct. But it's like if they are successful and you do have the NFTs and you do have the token, it's like you can still like, gain from them, appreciating and value. And, as we know in a bull market, as long as there is even like a fraction of like something that can sort of like people can sort of like, hang on to, it's like it will go up in price. And I just feel like, Wolfgame especially and many others like that are rooted in a lot of different like fundamentals, they have a good chance of doing that.
Okay, so let's close here and then because we're almost at time. Well, we're not way over by any means, but we did. This was fun and it went by fast. Okay, because I want to do a little bit just closing on your Seedphrase brand, let's call it. But this final question. Do you feel like what you just said, like projects, let's call it PFPs, that are still around, still have money to keep operating, still have a community. They're not Yuga, right? Maybe they don't have crazy volume, but they have their diehard core of 1,000 people. Yeah. Well, even Doodles I would still put like kind of bigger, right? And Doodles to me, and I'm always like the Doodles defender in some ways because I think people really underestimate what they're doing with like Golden Wolf. And I think people are a little bit too focused on like, we didn't like that tweet and like not focused enough on behind the scenes. But that's a separate thing that I've mentioned many times on the podcast. So, but like I think of like a Deadfellas, right? Which doesn't do crazy volume on the charts, but you've got Betty and Syke who are building and operating and you've got people who love them. Yes, like very much still here. Do you think, and this isn't to make you comment on Deadfellas specifically, but let's take that world. Like, are you like, yeah, that'll go up next bull cycle?
I think like, if they can prove themselves during a bear market, like, if they are still hanging around, as you mentioned, like Betty is still there. She's still showing up every single day, delivering. I think the community will, take notice of that, right? Like, I think like the community is already taking notice of the people who are sticking around, the people who were here for the right reasons and the people who were here for the wrong reasons, usually for the financial gain. So like, I think we are past the point of like where people are going to be spending tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars for a PFP alone, right? Like I think like what we're going to see in the future is, that PFP needs to mean something more than just a digital flex, like whether that's going to be tied into some sort of like game world, whether that's going to be yielding some kind of like token, that's yet to be seen, right? But like we are definitely done with the flex PFP days. The only thing that like, could still like, stand on its own for that is like CryptoPunks, right? Like, we mentioned earlier, they don't have to do anything, and that's the beauty of CryptoPunks. It's like everyone recognizes punks for what they are. They are this like symbol within this space that's very, very highly like well respected, and that's great, and that's like fantastic for people who can just like rep them and flex them online. But like a lot of these other PFP projects that just like spawned out of the mania as just that are probably not going to last if like that's their only strategy. I think we are going to have to go, and I time and time again I've tweeted about this over the years, like utility, everything needs utility, right? So like, I get it. Like art is the utility for art, but for PFPs is when it's just like a picture of a lion, like it's like, that's not really going to, be attracting the kind of investment or collectors that, you really want to see in an actual project.
$1 million question. When does the bull market come back?
I've been saying 12 to 18 months now for like the last 6 months.
So 6 to 12 months.
I'm at least like somewhat optimistic that we'll see something this summer. Usually summer's usually a pretty good time, for the market.
JPEG summer.
Exactly. JPEG summer, GameFi summer, DeFi summer. It's got a great ring to it as well, right? So like
a little more vitamin D, serotonin in the brain.
Everyone's
People
excited.
are like, all right.
Everyone's happy. Everyone's forgetting that the world's collapsing. Exactly. That's it. So like, everyone can get like a little bit euphoric for then. But like, I really do think like, if it isn't going to be, an NFT summer, it's going to be around the time of the Bitcoin halving, which I believe it's next April. Maybe you have to fact check me on that. So if it's not this summer, it's 100% not financial advice. I'll say 99% going to be next summer.
Okay. So, but you'll have the, Bitcoin prices will pump.
Mm-hmm.
And then it'll take a little while for that to flow down to NFTs.
Well, exactly. Like, that's what we usually see, right? Like, during a bull market, all this new money starts flowing into Bitcoin due to the euphoria, due to all this like added like, media press. And then that starts like flowing down to like, Ethereum and various altcoins. And, with all of this like extra capital that people have, maybe they'll start like risking that on JPEGs again, right? Just like what we saw last time. We saw the Bitcoin halving, we saw Bitcoin go up, we saw Ethereum go up, we saw all the altcoins start going up, and then everyone turned their attention to like what's next. And I absolutely believe that that's going to happen again to NFTs. And the great thing, for like, that we have to remember as well, is that the market cap on these, these NFTs, on these JPEGs, it's incredibly low. Like, these are like micro cap altcoins, if we want to sort of like start referring to them as that. And I feel like something that is so low that's like worth like maybe like 10 to 15 million, $20 million, it's very easy to move that. And I do believe that people are going to see this opportunity, see that volatility, and they're going to want a piece of the action.
Okay, I'm somewhat persuaded here. I do think that when we look back, this will mark close to the bottom. Like it does. I really do think we're just about hitting that moment.
This podcast has marked the bottom. Let's just say that. This is the bottom. This is
great.
capitulation.
I marked the top. I got in. The podcast got in basically the top. So I guess my work here is done.
Yes,
I'll get out right at the bottom. Awesome. Okay, last question because it's fine. We'll be fine. I don't even know. There's so much we could delve into here. But so, you've been DJing as Seedphrase.
Yes, correct.
So like in terms of your time, how much of it is trading and how much of it are you like day in, day out trying to build a business and a brand as part of Seedphrase? Or is it more of like, this is fun, I DJ, I'm dropping albums? Like, give me the rundown there.
Seedphrase has become like the main gig for me.
Okay.
Like that is now like my passion. Like I've been trading for the last 10 years. I've experienced, a level of success with that. And I'm not entirely driven by, by money anymore, right? Like I'm driven towards something that's like much grander than that.
Yeah.
And like, it's kind of like, how can you leave a mark, in this space? Right? Like I want to build something that, really does, benefit generations beyond me. And, with Seedphrase, I debuted in New York a couple of years ago now with like Steve Aoki, Don Diablo was there, Blondish.
That's like a big way to like just suddenly decide you're going to be a DJ.
It was crazy, right? And like that wasn't meant to be like just a once-off, like let's just get Seedphrase in the house and like let's have some fun. But like, seeing people's reactions, like getting like I was getting ripped in like multiple directions for like selfies, like the Hulu people were there. We were doing a documentary at the time. And I came away from that event thinking like I have something here, right? And then that's what really like what started getting the cogs turning. Like, let's turn Seedphrase into like this DJ, like music, NFTs, music. And then it was about like, 6 to 9 months later, I was having a coffee with a really good friend of mine in LA. And I was just telling them how I did this like shoot with Dolce & Gabbana, right? Like they were dropping, some Dolce, where to their followers, within the Web3 space. And they asked me to, be able to show them off in London. And he said to me, he's like, look, like you have this like high-end digital asset, very distinguishable. Everyone knows about it. why aren't you tying this to like high-end luxury brands, right? And that was like when I was thinking like, look, like that's brilliant. Like that was like my light bulb moment where it's like Seedphrase is not just like a DJ, but he's like, you know, he's also stylish, right? He represents this like movement where he not only
New money, baby.
New money, exactly. You know, he's like the stylish DJ.
Yeah.
He's seen in all the right places. You know, he's also like, you know, very ingrained in like Web3 culture. You know, and you know, that's when I started to like really like start pushing into, you know, like I want to start tying, you know, this brand to like luxury, to high end, and that's what I've done. You know, like I'm looking to launch my my own community in the coming, you know, 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the market. You know, because I really want to be able to give people, you know, some insight into my world as well, right? Like, you know, I want people to be there backstage with me. I want people to be wearing Seedphrase merchandise, right? Like, I want to see the 7-Trait Punk, you know, on tees, on caps, and, you know, things like that as well. And it's like, the, you know, that like malleable, like, you know, identity, you know, of the punk itself. You know, it's like traversing like multiple verticals, you know, music, fashion, art, because like Seedphrase, you know, he's also a curator. You know, I have, you know, built, you know, one of the largest personal collections of generative art, one-of-one art. You know, I also have the 7-Trait Punk and many other punks as well. So, you know, I want to be that man of culture, I guess.
So how would you describe, this is the actual last question because we do have to go because we're renting the studio, folks. What would you describe, like, how would you describe what this is? Like, you're a lifestyle brand? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if somebody's like, you're like, it is me, but it is a character, but it is a brand.
It's like, you know, like Daniel Maygott's the brains. Seedphrase is like the persona, right? It's like the embodiment of Web3, right? And I don't want to just like pigeonhole myself in Web3. You know, I want to be able to like break out of that as well into the mainstream. You know, as I mentioned, you know, Seedphrase, you know, is going to be seen, you know, wearing, you know, some of the coolest looks. You know, I want to be like, you know, like,
and that means you'll be in your like
exactly
head thing.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, like I will wear the helmet, you know, while I'm DJing like festivals and like, you know, boiler rooms and things like that. But I think it's really important as well to like, you know, bring that like personal touch to Seedphrase as well. Like there is someone, you know, underneath
man behind the mask.
Exactly, right? Like I want to sort of like you know, tap into that as well. I think it's really important to do that. And, you know, I want to like bring people into this world of mine, right? And like I want to be able to like provide value to these people and like vice versa as well, right? So I think like that is like, you know, what I'm really focused on right now. It's, you know, like I'm dropping a song, you know, mid June. It's called Angels.
Okay.
So, you know, it's going to be electronica.
Did you like make it, or did you work with a partner?
I co-produced it. Yeah. So, and I'm really, you know, very, very proud of this song as well. You know, we've been working on it for over 6 months now. And, you know, it's going to be tied to these like audio visuals, one-of-one. And it's going to be like, it's going to tell people, you know, a little bit more about Seedphrase, right? Like a day in the life of Seedphrase, because, you know, I do have this saturation within the Web3 space, but, you know, in the mainstream, people don't know who Seedphrase is. Sure. So I want to use this as like a way to be able to like educate people about who is this person, you know, behind the mask, and like what does this crypto punk represent, right? So like, you know, I really want to be across the 5 tracks. I want to be really like telling the story of like, you know, Seedphrase, you know, he's involved in fashion. He's this curator of arts, you know, he's also very much, you know, into music. You know, he DJs, so things like that. Like, I really want to start like creating like that narrative, you know, the storytelling, right? Like, I think some of the best, you know, NFT projects we have seen to date have had very strong storytelling behind them. So that's what I want to do.
Awesome. Danny, Seedphrase Danny, thank you so much for coming
Appreciate
on
it, Carly.
JPEG. So glad we could do this in person.
A pleasure. Thank you.
And yeah, we'll keep in touch. We'll have
do
you
it.
back as you track all this. All right.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you liked this conversation, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps me out, it helps the show out, and it means you will get alerts and updates when we post new content. Thanks again.